All right, so I think we will start to begin. Right? Yes.
Mark is not deserting us. He just had another commitment.
Yes. Mark is just has another commitment that he's not deserting us. So we will begin this morning in prayer. God of history, past, present, and future, you are the one guiding your people towards communion with you and with each other. May you guide our learning and conversation and help us to embrace the future while being rooted in you. Bless this time together as we explore the changes within our time and within your church. In your holy name, amen. So last week we kind of went through the understandings of the four great awakenings that were the kind of pivotal moments in American history, starting with the First Great Awakening. This also happened, again, concurrently. A lot of these movements happened within the European context, but we're just focusing more closely into how the Great Awakenings impacted the U.S. scene here. So with the First Great Awakening, just before the Revolutionary War, so more it's the development of the Americas in the 1730s and 40s, whereas you get these theological groups coming out of this time that are largely like the Methodists from the Wesley Brothers, the Baptists that are taking more of the radical Reformation theology of the Anabaptists and the radical Reformation of the early 1600s, and then the Pietists, branching out from the state Lutheran churches and really emphasizing this belief in individual religious experience, a belief of the heart. So religion now is less centered on dogmas around church teaching and more about how you individually believe. But there is still an emphasis on true and correct biblical interpretation. Then you get into the Second Great Awakening in the late period of the 18th into the early 19th centuries. So you have a examination of trying to get back to what the original church looked like. So that's the restorationalism that was growing out of this period of how does the church move to become more like the early church. You get movements of the Mormonism and Adventism that then later will influence later restorational church bodies through the holiness movement of the Third Great Awakening. Again, it continues to move more, religion becomes more voluntary and more individualism. It's a continual shift away from a very authoritarian kind of faith to more individual expression. The third began out of the Civil War and lasted up until probably about the 30s, until before the Second World War. That was the push for, again, this was the period where it was the two sides of the same coin. So you got the more progressive forms of religion coming out of this period of the mainline denominations pressing for abolitionism, so the removal of slavery within the United States, and a really focus on ethics. So I talked about how the Methodists were a very large body that pressed both women's rights and for voting, but as well as for abolitionism. The Methodist Church, in its context at this time, is now the largest Protestant church in the United States. Presbyterians held a very large influence for many years. That's why you have, obviously like Princeton, and you have a lot of the big institutions are Presbyterian, but Methodists they're growing rapidly in the New American, during this 1850s, during the Third Great Awakening. And then you have, on the opposite side of the coin, you then have the holiness movement. You have a very stark contrast against the progressivism of the social gospel movements, but now you have a more an emphasis on the charismatic movements that are coming out, where individual faith is now really blossoming into like in Pentecostalism. So the belief there is that in order to be like a true Christian, the Spirit must come in you, and you must have the fire of the Spirit and speak in tongues, and it becomes this entirely different theological tradition than we've seen before. And that's this holiness movement. Again, and then likewise with the Jehovah's Witnesses being created, you have another group that's pressing against the traditional church teachings of the Trinity and such, and again, moving away from that being anti-Trinitarian, just like Mormonism. Then we have the Fourth Great Awakening, so starting after post-war, so after Vietnam, and you have this kind of movement that is continuing today. I don't think have necessarily became a Fifth Great Awakening, but a lot of scholars are saying that we are in a movement toward this Great Awakening that we are a part of right now is probably the biggest since the Reformation, as far as the change, and that just shows, and they say it just, because of data. We have great data now that we can examine, and how the church has changed through that, and religious expressions in the United States has changed. So we will look at that, and then kind of the models in which we can grow out of. Is there any questions as far as what we have learned and experienced in just the American context, or the world context too? I'm happy to talk. Because you have to, at this point too, the religious context around the globe through these periods of colonialism and is very different around the world. I studied religious colonialism in South Africa during a study abroad. So I studied both. So it was an amazing trip, but just side note is that I went to the University of Amsterdam. I studied there for 2 weeks under a few professors, and then I went to South Africa to the University of Stellenbosch, which is outside of Cape Town, and then went back to the University of London to study the connections there, because South Africa was a British colony as well as Dutch. So it was a really examination of how the Christian faith got to South Africa through this colonialism, but then how the church, like the Dutch Reformed, the Calvinist Church of the Netherlands, how they use their theology to create apartheid. And that's where, like in the University of Stellenbosch, it was like the mastermind creator of apartheid during the 50s through the 90s. And so it was really interesting to then learn about how Christianity not only just reached like the African people, South African people, but has formed into its own expressions there, and which is, in the African context as a whole, is a very large growing Christian population. So what we're looking at here in like the executive study of the religious landscape through the Pew Research is not indicative of what is happening around the world, especially in the Asian and African context. When I was in Africa, a big part, an issue that they're having is they have a lot of these growing non-denominational churches, just like in the United States, but they really press a prosperity gospel. Is anyone familiar or understand prosperity gospel? So prosperity gospel is a teaching that more you give to the church, the better you will become. More you give to the church, like if you give, the pastor will get up and say, you give me all your money, I will cure your cancer in the name of Jesus. And it is a huge, huge problem in South Africa, where you have 85 to 95% of the population with HIV/AIDS. You have also movements where they're taking traditional religion and mixing it with Christianity and saying, just a bunch of different teachings are being taught in a lot of these different growing churches. And so when I was there, now this is in 2013, so obviously it's been quite some time, but it's still prevalent. And so you have people that are desperate for healing. I mean, they're sick, and so and a lot of people are preying on these individuals. So I was there with the Lutheran and Episcopal Church, the Anglican Church, and I worked at both of them, and for some time, and doing mission work on top of my studies, and just trying to go and meet people where they're at and hear their stories. It was pretty interesting, but yeah, a little tangent, but yeah, it shows just that there is movement still happening around the world that we don't necessarily see. Prosperity gospel, just historically, is a newer theological teachings, largely created and established by Joel Osteen, which I'm sure we all have heard of, or at least seen, flipping through the channel late at night, that he is the largest proponent and teacher of this kind of doctrines. Oh.
I'm just.
Yeah, no, yeah, so,
Very, very
yeah.
interesting, considering what happened, the tragedy that happened last weekend.
yeah,
And starting to have conversations with the
yeah,
perpetrator.
yeah.
Very.
No, very interesting. Yeah. Patty's referencing the assassination of the speaker here in Minnesota, and it is now becoming clear that the perpetrator was very radicalized religiously.
And a lot, had a lot of business connections.
Yes.
In the county.
Yeah, and yeah, so there's a lot of, he had a lot of business connections, a lot of just very strange, very interesting person, but definitely it shows how theology can be corrupted and really impact people's lives. I cannot stress that enough, that really people think theology or teaching is kind of boring or it's not important to know, but when it makes people do things like commit political assassinations, it shows that we in our society maybe should be talking more about what people believe and why these beliefs are making them do certain things like murder. But yeah, it's a very, very interesting kind of tadbit. We might come back and talk more about that. Okay, any other questions before we move on about the Great Awakenings? Okay. So I kind of want to get ideas as far as what are people, when they hear the word spiritual versus religious. So let's start with spiritual. What kind of words do we hear?
Spiritual will do what is right.
Spiritual will do what?
The religious will do what the church tells them to do.
Okay. Spiritual will, or integrity. It would. Can I summarize that with integrity?
Sure, yeah.
Integrity versus maybe doctrine, where doctrine maybe not necessarily have integrity. Okay.
Open versus closed.
Oh, I like that. Open versus closed.
Broad perspective versus narrow.
Broad versus narrow. Yeah, very similar. Maybe what I thought is spiritual is as a journey, whereas religion is more attached to a physical place. You have to have a physical place to have a religious experience versus a spiritual experience can be a journey, it can be outside. Any other kind of thoughts? I'll read. So one of the teachers that I will be talking about today and next week, which again, I should do a little housekeeping. Next week, remember, we will be now meeting on Monday, 10 a.m., not on Thursday, for our final teaching. But Diana Butler Bass, she's an Episcopal priest and a seminary professor, very amazing writer. She wrote this, Christianity After Religion, the End of Church and the Birth of a New Spiritual Awakening. Amazing book, very helpful to this conversation. She wrote this, what year was this, 2013? Let's see. 2012. So it is slightly dated now, but she does a great job, which we will get into, about the model of which the church should change. I'll look at, so she does a list of spirituality as experience, connection, transcendence, searching, intuition, prayer, meditation, nature, energy, open, which we mentioned, wisdom, inner life, 12 steps, inclusive, and doubt. Whereas religion, she identifies as institution, organized, rules, order, dogma, authority, beliefs, buildings, so kind of the physical aspect, structure, defined principles, hierarchy, orthodoxy, boundaries, and certainty. And I think this is helpful as we get into what we need to change and how we can maybe blend this into a church for the future. So yeah, we'll keep looking at Diana Butler Bass. And another teacher of mine that I'll just highlight right now, Pat Kiefert. He, very interesting person. He is the president director of research of Church Innovations Institute. So this Church Innovations Institute is a consulting firm. Pat Kiefert, yep. And this book is A Missional Journey of Spiritual Discovery. We Are Here Now, A New Missional Era. He was one of my, he is a seminary professor both at the University of Stellenbosch, South Africa, and the Luther Seminary. He's now retired fully. He now just mops the floor at a bar in Montana. He's a brilliant man. He is hilarious. He's from Deadwood, South Dakota. He was born with a Lutheran father and a Catholic mother. He then went to CEMEX, which was the split of the Missouri Synod. They had a theological split, and so a lot of the progressives were leaving the Missouri Synod. He went to CEMEX in St. Louis, Missouri, and then he got his PhD and his JD from the University of Chicago at the same time. He did a joint degree program there. His advisor was Antonin Scalia, Supreme Court Justice, for his JD, and at the same time, Pat was a card-carrying communist. So him and Scalia had a very robust discussions, but they became very good friends, and actually, Pat actually helped serve during Scalia's funeral. He then went on and got another PhD from the University of Paris. He became, because he spoke fluent German, he was interim bishop of one of the Niedersachsen-Anhalt, the state churches in Germany, and has served all around the world. He is the direct consultant for the Archbishop of Canterbury for the Anglican Church. And yeah, great man. As funny as can be, talks like a sailor, but really good friend of mine. But he definitely looks into how churches need to become more spiritual, and that is a big factor. So that's what the spiritual discovery is, where he looks at. But yeah, very interesting man. Once he retired, he's like, I want to just go fly fishing and not worry about anything. So he works for a former Lutheran pastor who now owns a bar and casino in Montana, and they're neighbors, and so he's the janitor at this bar. So, but yeah, so we'll be using them as like our guides in our discussions. today, as well as with Adam Copeland from the articles of last week. So with these words and how we're going to move to a place of kind of blending this into a context that we can use, I think it's important to then know the context where we are at now within the American context. So if we want to look at the data, so when you have this data, so like I said, this came out this year. It was just released and published, February of 25, taking data from a 2-year study from 2023 to 24, where you have 62% of U.S. adults describe themselves as Christian, 40% Protestant, 19% Catholic, and 3% others. 29 religiously unaffiliated, where the 19% that identify as nothing in particular are what are nuns, which are the largest religious group, and not the NUNs, but the NON nuns. So this is what would be considered the largest growing group, both in Europe, as European context, Australian context, and the American context. And elsewhere in the world, there is, in more developed nations, there are some growing, but nothing like it is being seen here. So, because you have so 19 when the first kind of survey was taken, nothing like what the Pew did, and as far as like it's in depth. But we do have some data as far as, and this is in Bass's book, that in 1962, 22% of Americans had a mystical experience of God, where in 1976, 31% had a mystical experience, and by 2009, 48% of Americans say they had a mystical experience of God. So when you look at it, you have, just that data alone is very interesting, because it says people, even though at the height of religious participation, I should say rather, height of religious participation in the United States, we had a very low religious mystical experience. Yet people now that we are, as time has gone on, more people say that they are having religious experiences or mystical experiences, spiritual experiences, than they are participating in the church. And that is, I think, a very interesting factor on what is happening in our context today.
So I'll just share one little story.
Yeah.
And a lot of you know Maddie, our granddaughter, and she and her husband were stayed at our house last night. And so this morning, I don't know how the conversation began, but we were talking about mystical experiences.
Mm-hmm.
And John, as his name said, when he was younger, he's a climber. Guy that loves Montana and Wyoming. So there's
Yep.
where his head is. And so he said they were out on climb, and it was largely dolomite rock where they were going. And he said he found this thing, this rock in his hand, and he said it had to be a tool, because he said it was perfectly formed with the finger and or the thumb. And he said, so I took that with me, and he said, and I had nightmares, spiritual nightmares. So he said, I made a point of going back and putting this rock where I had found it. And I said, well, if you look at the Native Spirit, as the Native Americans say, well, that rock was not ready to be moved.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, he wouldn't have had the, And he said, after that, I was fine.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, it is cross, and I should note, too, it's not just Christians that are having more spiritual experiences. It's across religions and across the nun groups. So Muslims are having more religious experiences. Mormons are having more. It's across the board. It just is a fact that people are gaining more a open concept of what the divine can be. Yeah, so it's as Bast says, it's an extensive reorientation from an externalized religion toward an internalized spiritual experience.
What causes that? What has brought on that?
Yeah.
those phenomena?
And it's very complicated. So what I was, let me just form my thoughts here. Going back to the Great Awakenings and with religion becoming less about church, you just simply belong because it's your culture, and more about you are voluntarily choosing religion, you voluntarily choose your denomination or your faith or whatever, or your non-faith, and it's more individual. So individualism in our psyche, in our minds, has become extremely important. And how we individually experience God is now just a natural grain. We don't necessarily are taught it. It's just a part of our culture now. So it's an individualism that has changed. And so what a lot of sociologists and systematic theologians like Pat have examined in our culture is, I guess one of the best examples that I learned from Pat is people now it's a loss of community. So we don't have community because that is not created as the ideal state of an American person. An ideal state of an American person is to have your own space. Outside of the world and experience, it's your own. Like he gave an example that I'll always remember is we build our cars to be as silent from the world outside of us and outside of. We want the most quiet car, and that is the ideal car. We want an apartment or a penthouse or a house that has a direct elevator from the parking garage to your direct penthouse without interacting with any other people. And those two examples have always stuck with me because, yeah, it's kind of like when you think of celebrities or you think of what money can buy you more and more individualism. And that is what is kind of this innate psyche shift that we have gone under, and which has created this loss of community. So I think that is kind of where then this, this emphasis on you wanting to have an individual spiritual experience rather than a collective spiritual experience. The individual one is one that's winning out. And on top of it, there is also a negative factor, a side effect per se. The side effect of this hyper-individualism that we are going under is that we are now, just this past year, have created hopelessness and meaninglessness as a major health factor contributing to the death of Americans. Hopelessness, I'll write that down, because that's very important. I lost my marker. Yeah, so hopelessness is now classified as a health condition by the CDC because it is leading to people dying. I mean, a lot of, especially in older generations, that if you feel like you have nothing to live for, why live? And it's not that we are seeing increased rates of suicide, which we've always struggled with that throughout history, but it is just this factor that is, I think, contributed a side effect from this really hyper individualism that our culture emphasizes. I mean, you can go back to like the causes of it from being like, you can blame basically Lutheran philosophers are kind of where it kind of started out of. Kant is a major philosopher that kind of started this. And so it kind of really created this hopelessness that I think is very important into what is the symptom that we are experiencing. But now we have to ask, how can the church meet people where they're at in their hopelessness? And that's going to be our challenge. So our culture today, individualism, so I'll put that, hyper individualism, hopelessness, loss of community. We don't need people, we don't need people to watch our kids. We can pay someone to go to a daycare. We don't need people to necessarily go and farm and know the farmer to get your groceries. We've continued to shrink our need to know certain individuals and work as a community to sustain life. So that is a contributing factor. We have a factor in our culture where what we believe is correct. So so if we believe it must be correct. We have this partisanship that is in our own beliefs, and it's a terrible factor of just the Christian faith. I mean, with the denominations. Presbyterians don't really emphasize enough of the true presence in the Eucharist, and so, but I believe in the real emphasis of the consubstantiation, that they don't emphasize the consubstantiation. So mine is correct, and so you just have this fracturing of religious dogmas that are continuing to press this hyper-individualism.
How does the
Yep.
religious experience up there, which one of those ties into the nuns?
Yeah, definitely the nuns will be spiritual but not religious, is the factor. But the nuns simply have, what is the, there's a phrase that I think actually Adam, that I really liked. It's, let's see, where is it? They have like a whatever factor, that people just don't feel the need to participate. It's just a factor that's not a part of people's lives, because they can get what they think they can get, I should say. But now this is going to be, people think they can get the satisfaction of simply being spiritual but not religious. They think they're satisfied. But often when people are really truly asked, they're still hopeless. They're not really being fulfilled spiritually from just simply themselves. And this is a part of our culture. So it's a larger part of, it's not necessarily the church has done something. which often is the case, but it's not the only factor that the church is just not good at reaching young people. It's the fact that we just have a culture where we're hyper-individualistic and we're just simply stubborn and hopeless.
Well, and I think sometimes it's easier to have somebody tell you something.
Yep.
Oh, so you kind of believe, oh, yeah, somebody told me that, and that's the way it is.
Yeah.
You know, and then so it's like this ability not to be curious,
Mm-hmm.
learn, you know,
Yeah.
you're learning.
Yeah.
Everything for themselves.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that, I've seen that so often in people who have an unfortunate diagnosis, and they'll say, well, I'll pray about it and I'll see what God tells me to do.
Mm-hmm.
And to them, I throw up my aunt who said, I'll listen to what God has to say, and then I'll use the brain he gave me.
Yeah. Yeah.
She lived 18 years with ovarian cancer, 5
Yeah.
as they usually.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, and again, we can continue to touch on this too, is we still do have, again, I don't mean this to pit theologies against each other, but we do still have churches that teach doctrine so stringently that lead to people having crises of faith that then lead them to never go back to the church. We simply cannot go around to every hyper-evangelical, small e evangelical church and tell them that maybe, their theology is eventually going to drive people away from the church. It's just impossible, but I think we can work on just, looking at ourselves. But I mean, that's what Adam kind of talked about for the young adult article that I shared. He talked about how one person, a young man, described himself as within his conservative evangelical denomination, but then the rigid faith he was taught in Bible college sent him into a crisis of faith. Now his questions about the Bible and about piety and the certain theological doctrines make him feel unwelcome in the church of his youth and uninspired to try another church.
When you were talking about no community and the hopelessness, you look at the young people and their community is right there
In the palm of your hand.
in the palm of their hand on social media.
Mm-hmm.
And that's all they have,
Mm-hmm.
and that's all they know,
Yeah.
and they believe everything that's said there.
Yeah. And now we're experiencing it. It's even within your generation now too.
And the hopelessness too.
Yeah.
After the COVID crisis,
Mm-hmm.
so many people, they were shut off, everybody was shut away, and that has not come back. There are still people who
Yeah.
do not want to go where there are a lot of people, or they just got so used to having their groceries delivered and they shut themselves off completely.
Yeah.
And it's changed.
It's changed,
everybody's
yeah.
life.
Yeah, basically, I mean, COVID is a huge factor, and I mean, there's going to be dissertations on this, on COVID for the next 100 years. I mean, I can think of, 50 dissertations just about the religious, changes just from COVID. Basically, just like even the economic changes from COVID. I mean, we're still recovering from the economic changes of people not having to go to work in a physical space. And now companies are trying to push them back into work, and then they're realizing, oh wait, you need to come back to work, but we don't even have enough desks for everyone. Both the state and like my husband's company, they on 3 days a week, but they forgot that they hired 20% more people during COVID. And so now it's like you increased more people, but now your building wasn't built for the same amount of people, or for the more people.
People are used to not having to pay for parking.
Yeah.
Driving
Yeah.
to work.
Yeah.
buying lunch out there.
Yeah, so it's, I think the COVID, let's say the 2-year span of all the lockdowns, not lockdown, pushed us, fast forward us 20, 30 years. Like and even like the mayor of Minneapolis said, downtown office spaces were shrinking, but it just fast forwarded 50 years. And now it's just this crisis of what do we do with all these skyscrapers that people aren't going. But now it's like, now companies are realizing, so it might even start to trickle back a little bit because they're realizing they just hired a bunch of people to work from home and never met them, and they're all, like there's a whole, side note, tangent, but like Wall Street Journal just did an article about how some of these companies had hired all these North Koreans, and that they're stealing all the data from these companies. And because they made fake profiles through AI, you can make fake, voicemails and stuff and sound like an American, but they're taking all these companies' data and sending it and selling it back to North Korea. Very interesting, but that's a side note. We'll take a little break here, and then we will continue. Refresh.
And this is the last of the cookies, and one of the friends for Monday, I guess, so help yourself.
Google, or just search in YouTube, Cross Lake Presbyterian, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it should be there.
Something.
And then maybe put it on the website too. Yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah. 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 Yeah, 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 very interesting. The way, very interesting.
Yep.
Yeah.
Then to say that, because it's the choice if they want to go. Sometimes they do, they do what we and so, it's frightening to me when they do that. I just think, oh my God, the problem is,
Yeah.
so, you know, and all I can do is just say, I'm crazy.
Yeah, Kate congratulated me on my control of a certain individual.
And that was usually enough to stop.
No, I agree.
I don't think anyone is shocked. We're so tired, but I'm fine with it. I'd rather see
I can't be here next Monday. I would too, actually.
That's why
Yes, you know the change.
that's why I said, oh, we need to do one for surgery on Wednesday. No, just especially if I have to have both two trauma surgeons, I have to have the urologist and the ortho, and so either of them may start to go on summer vacation, and it was going to get much more difficult to schedule
So
both of them.
when you need to see a specialist, you take one they've got.
When, yeah, they tell you, yeah. Yeah, and they're just doing this, like, they're making time, they actually cancel a few other appointments. But they like it, they like, the research they can do on me. So, I know I've been published quite a few times.
You're right.
Yeah.
That's the best way to say it.
It's not a scary thing to learn.
All right, we will continue.
Well, I have a question.
Yes.
Where in all of this today?
Yep.
Do these mega churches fit in?
Yeah. Funny, I was just researching for some context. So I was looking up, probably one of the biggest growing church in our area that we know of is Timberwood. Timberwood, in Nisswa, south of Nisswa. Timberwood is affiliated with Converge North Central. Converge was, I think, North Central American Baptist Church, and then they changed their name to just Converge. So it is affiliated with this more, I would say, for as far as what Baptists come from, it is more on the open and progressive side. They don't necessarily require, it's very much like an association of congregations rather than a really strict denominations structure. Kind of similar to what like the evangelical free church is, where they have a general, I would say, more Baptist theology that is to be taught in their churches, but they don't have a full structure or system like mainline Protestant churches.
What do you know about Eagle Brook?
And
Heritage.
heritage.
So Eaglebrook is, I don't know if they could be a part of the Converge system. I'm not sure. So Eaglebrook is probably the largest megachurch system in the Twin Cities. Again, yeah.
They are a Brett Baxter now too.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Okay, yeah, so yeah, they now have a campus in Baxter. So that, again, very much, that's even probably more, I would say, more conservative than Timberwood as far as theology.
But they're all kind of tied into the Baptist.
Yes, they're all tied into the Baptists. Yep, yeah. Heritage,
Heritage, I think it's assembly.
that's Assemblies of God.
Okay.
Yep. So that used to be just, they used to have a different name. I actually attended there a few times growing up because my dad and his second wife, her family was members of the Heritage Church. I just remember it was like 3-hour-long services. Preaching was like 2 hours of preaching. I will never forget that. I was like 10 years old and I wanted to die.
They didn't nurse the better
My mother would get up and walk out, and then when it's time for the Presbyterian, she could go have lunch with her.
Yeah, that was, I just remember just being absolutely completely starving after, like, because I'm not a big breakfast person, but when it's already like 1, 2 o'clock and you've been at church all day, like, I mean, I not to, they have their own space and their own ministry, great, but I think, yeah, very, very interesting as far as these different church groups and how they can attract, especially looking in our context, like in north central Minnesota context, and how these churches are still growing or at least staying at the levels at which they were. I think, I should say, I think political ideology is very much a part of where you belong into these churches. Not saying there's, conservatives not here in the Presbyterian Church or in the Lutheran Church. I mean, I think those are healthy places where,
Oh, we're nice.
yeah. But I think if very much there is hints of what I would consider Christian nationalism in some of those church bodies. And that is, I think, attractive to certain people of a certain political ideology. If that's to be as politically correct as possible without I am being recorded.
One of the things that plays into this is that we don't go home for Sunday dinner.
Yeah.
It used to be a big deal.
Yes,
You know,
yes.
it's always-
Culture was always centered around Sunday dinner,
Right.
yeah.
My brother-in-law was a Methodist pastor, and so my mother, who would get up and leave if it got too long, always thought of him because he would say, if the roast was burning in the oven, you've lost your congregation.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And so it's, I think in just looking at our context is very unique compared to, let's say, the context in Seattle. I have one of my good friends who's a pastor in Seattle. He would consider himself very progressive. And yet, in his parish, he has struggled because he says the triune name for baptisms. So the Father, the Son, and Holy Spirit has been a part of contention for his church because just the name Father is problematic. He says, that is what the Scripture says, that is what I'm going to do. And that is what the church teaching says that I have to do, that is what we're going to do. And even that, so even when, let's say, on the opposite side of political spectrum, having a congregation that progressive can even be points of contention, just like having, on the other side, the Christian nationalism. Is everyone familiar with it? This is kind of a newer word in sociology and culture right now. Any questions? Describe it? Okay, so, yeah, so Christian nationalism is a movement I would say a political ideological movement centered around Christianity. It kind of starts off with this idea that we kind of already debunked, is that Christian was based off of the United States was based off of the Christian religion, which we kind of debunked when you look at actually who was Christian in the room during the Continental Congress, and there were not many were Christians. I mean, there was a few Presbyterians and a few Methodists and Anglicans, but not many. A lot of them primarily were theists, so they were not. They didn't recognize Jesus as the Son of God. I think that's the baseline of what being Christian is. And so you have this now movement saying we must get back to where we were as a Christian nation, using political means and using the church as general church as means to get back into society. So it's the lamenting of no prayer in school. It's the putting the 10 Commandments in City Hall, and it's the state of Oklahoma needing the 10 Commandments in every classroom, and so it's it is happening, but it's using the Christian faith, or the Judeo-Christian beliefs, as a political movement, rather than a movement within Christianity. So I think it's deeply a part of the current administration's agendas, even though President Trump is an Episcopalian by the books, supposedly. He got married a few times in Episcopalian church, but
Is it also a way to try to get rid of the Muslims and
yes.
anybody else in this?
Yes, and that's where it becomes really fun. Thank you. That's where it becomes really fundamentalized. This movement is that yes, it's not just pro-America Christianity; it's anti-other religion Christianity. That's where it really breaks down and starts becoming radicalized. And so I mean, a few years ago, I mean, obviously, we heard of like the Westboro Baptist Church, where they would go and protest funerals for service members that died. And they would protest and stand outside of the churches or wherever the funeral was being held and protest, because they taught that because America accepts queer people, LGBTQ people, that soldiers are being killed, and that 9/11 happened because of America's more acceptance of the LGBTQ community. So that church would be, I would consider now, we didn't have the term as robust back then, but looking in hindsight sociologically, that would be considered like a Christian nationalist movement. They had an agenda, a political agenda, guys in their Christian doctrines. But yeah, so we have this kind of whole scheme that's going on in our society right now with this Christian nationalism. I want to highlight and talk about kind of what happened in this period that we are still in, and why we have like Christian nationalism. So we have this post 9/11 terrorist fear, I think is still in our minds. This anti-Islamic, anti-Muslim sentiments. We have a cultural anxiety of the changes happening, especially after COVID. I mean, society has changed fast. I mean, we are in a point of technological advances that are, what has happened in the last 5 years has been some of the largest changes in technology than it has in the last 500 years. More has happened just in the last 5 years as far as what we can do and what our computers are doing. I mean, just like Good Morning America had a little thing about AI is now discovering how to not turn itself off and not listen to people's, and it's duplicating its mind. So if you erase one AI, it can move itself to another computer and recreate itself. So we're all already in a point where that we are, our technology is starting to beat us out, and not again to install fear, but it is something that is a part of our world that we have to recognize. And this is even before last Sunday, we have experienced political violence in our time, thinking of the attack on the US Capitol, but also the attack now just past Sunday. We are clearly, I mean, whether we are having climate change. It's just become this environmental crisis, is from what you look at to the changing of weather, more severe weather, the changing of now Tornado Alley. There's scientific evidence now that it's shifting, it's moving. I mean, I love snowmobiling. We haven't had snow in the last 2 years. And so there's changes that are happening that people are concerned of, and then there's this partisanship and this partisan anger that is within our society. What I kind of want to highlight too in this data that we have is church has now become church as work, meaning sometimes you just don't feel like participating or getting out of the house. And that I think Adam did a really good job with his article about I love the church, it's hard to love specific congregations. He did a good job about, you know, after, like his example was, he went 10 weeks where he was pulpit supplying, and that his wife was doing night shifts and weekend shifts, and they went about 10 weeks of not going to a church, or he was busy with other responsibilities, and then by week 11 they finally have the Sunday to themselves, and they just want to be home. And not saying that's wrong by any means, but it's just a fact of life. People's lives have changed and have evolved, And people's lives are not necessarily centered around the 9 o'clock hour on Sunday morning. People have other things. People, like in his other article, I think highlights too, young people are working, could be working 3 jobs, and they're working over the weekends, they're working Sundays, or just simply just don't have time to do any other things.
There was a time when Wednesday was church.
Mhm.
Wednesday night was
Yep.
church night. And now you've got sports every day of the week.
Mhm.
And kids are in everything. And so there's tournaments on the weekends.
Oh, absolutely. People's lives have become busy, and we have lost the societal structures that kind of kept the church going. Was the church really alive during these periods? That's a whole other question. In the 1950s, when you had 80-90% of Americans all in church on Sunday morning in the 1950s, after the World War, but you have only, how many percent of people actually having only 22% of Americans at that time had religious experiences, personal religious, spiritual experiences. So I wouldn't say that the church was certainly doing well. The coffers were being filled, the buildings were being built, but
People were doing what they were supposed to.
they're doing what they're supposed to, because that's what culturally it was a church as, as almost church as club is a phrase that is used, church as entertainment, and how this has now shifted, whereas people don't necessarily want to participate just because they don't feel like they have to any longer.
And it's interesting you say that because there are many seniors up here who have moved, from the cities or from wherever, that don't go to church.
Mm-hmm.
And so I asked one of my good friends, he says, I was on every committee, served on every board when I was down in Minneapolis.
Mhm.
I don't want to do that anymore. And so they're a little bit skeptical
The pressures of the,
about coming back
Mhm.
because what are they going to be asked to do?
yeah. And yeah. Especially if they come here. And no, it is. And it is the pressures, and I think Adam also does a good job of kind of detailing is when going to a church, he liked a few communities, but it just maybe didn't fit well, or that there's other things. And so when we look at it, we have to, kind of think of what needs to happen, and what can we look at. A few things before moving on, where the growth of conservative Christianity, preaching a correct, true doctrine, real relationship with Jesus, theologically correct, often politically right-wing Jesus, has seen huge increases through the 1990s, especially during Reagan administrations, and then whereas though since then, even like the Southern Baptists, the Missouri Synod, and the Conservative Presbyterian Church in America have seen some decrease after large amounts of growth for a good 20 years or so in the late 20th century. Whereas the mainline churches like PCUSA, ELCA have seen declines since the 70s. What I want to look at is kind of what Diana Butler Bass talks about, is how church has been done. And church, how it's been done in the past, is often, here is our denomination, and here is what we believe, here is our dogma, and what I think. It's all about what I think. And she details this by believing. So the church as a place of believing. Believing. So once you believe, then you can behave. You finally can practice your beliefs correctly. That you can attend church correctly. That you can participate in the church and behave the way you should because you finally believe the correct doctrines. But then, only after you start believing, behaving, can you belong. The only way in which you can get to the belonging. Now remember, hopelessness and meaninglessness, you can't get to being hope-filled until you believe, behave, then you can belong and find hope in the message of Jesus Christ. That is, I think, a very interesting argument that she sets up. That historically the church has done this model. But it's very interesting because you still have groups that that still go off of this model, like Timberwood in Nisswa. So I was just looking during our break. So you have a church. So Timberwood, I believe, has, they worship, let's say, 1,000 people a weekend. Out of their membership, they only actually have, this is old information that I know, but when they were worshiping or collectively had a group of like 1,000, 1,500 people, they actually only had 200 members on the books. But they were, and so I'm sure their numbers are now larger as far as actual membership on the books, but it's still a great deal of people that attend often these large mega churches never join. They never get to that belonging, but they do often have this model of believing, behaving, and belonging. You can argue that maybe they actually just emphasize, just behave, just practice and worship with us, and the rest doesn't matter. But they're always going to be very important about their teachings. So I looked up what their membership application, and this is, again, not knocking what they do, this is just their practice, it's on their website. So you fill out your name, your address, your gender, birth date, marital status, your church background, most recently your church membership, if you're in good standing. They ask you if you've been disciplined by another church, who you should, if the church should notify your past church before joining, if you've been baptized by immersion as a believer. Then they ask you to write a paragraph about, explain how and when you became a Christian, what makes you sure that you are a Christian, what evidence is there that Jesus Christ lives within you. I thought that's a very interesting phrase. What Bible verses assure you of your salvation? If you have read and agreed with the entire doctrinal statement of Timberwood Church, if you read and agreed with the Timberwood Church Covenant, and comments by the applicant.
That's an applicant?
That's the application for membership.
I don't think anybody here would be able to.
So that's the application for membership. And everyone is asterisked with the red, so you must answer them all before you are even able to submit. So it shows very interesting that it is definitely still in that model. You have to be, how do you know, what was the phrase? I just never have heard of it. What evidence is there that Jesus Christ lives within you? That is a very hard question. And it's something that I don't know many people could answer. And answer it or answer it well enough that you're assured that that's your answer. And I think that is, again, the argument on why churches are not doing so well. Clearly they're doing fine, but I don't think a lot of people get to their membership application. And so it's always interesting, and I think that is where, like looking at kind of what the article like Adam Copeland talked about with young people, is there needs to be a space of curiosity and a space where people can bring their questions authentically, that what he says here, that ultimately rewarding to be open and honest with my questions, to always be a partner in the conversation and avoid being someone who is grasping for authority, is kind of what people are looking for. They're not looking for someone in authority to tell them what they need to believe, how they need to behave in order for them to belong. So what Diana Butler Bass in her book highlights then is the entire reversal. She says that we need to allow people to belong. We need them just to feel like they can be themselves, whoever they may be. That people with not nice clothes can feel comfortable. If someone has blue hair and tattoos, that they can still belong and still find a place that they can be authentic. That is how then we can allow them to, now it's a reversal, so it's going to be, they can behave who they are. They can behave, and then you can eventually have them find faith and find what do they believe, and what centers them around this community. So, yeah. So go ahead.
Well, isn't it simply, I mean, to me, if they care about other people, then that's a great starting point. Be they Christian or Jew. And of course, I'm kind of prejudiced to the Jews because they built Raymond Blank Memorial Hospital for Children and Younger Rehabilitation Center, which was the first hospital in the country that took quadriplegics.
Yeah.
And so, you know, to me, who cares
Yeah.
what religion they are?
Yeah.
Do they care about others?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, isn't that what Jesus said?
I have
Love.
to go deeper.
Yeah, and love your neighbor. What's the greatest commandment? Love God and love your neighbor as yourself. That is, and Luther emphasized this as the basis, that is the law fulfilled. That is what the law is. We have a church that, you know, if that is what is preached, and as far as for law, and then that Jesus Christ is the Savior of the world, that is the gospel, the good news. Those go two hand in hand, law and gospel. That is where the true church lies.
And that's how you answer that question of Timberwoods. How
Yeah.
do you know that Jesus is working through you?
Yeah. Yeah. That's how you answer the question. That's how I would answer it. Is that how do I know Jesus is in me? The example is that Jesus is within everyone. As Luther also says, that we are to be little Christ to everyone, is the calling of the Christian. And that we are dutifully bound to everyone. So we have been saved. So this is the freedom of the Christian. We're kind of going back to just the theology. Is that the freedom of the Christian is to be Lord of all and to be slave of all. That's Luther's thesis. Lord of all, that you are saved by God's doing, by Christ's own doing, and it is nothing that you can do about it. You have already been saved, and there is nothing you can do. But, on the other hand, you are a slave to all, that you are dutifully bound to be Christ to everyone. And that is a part of the commitment of a person who has faith in Christ. If you have faith, you serve your neighbor, period. You love them. And that is, I think, often not emphasized a lot in more conservative, right-wing, Jesus-focused churches. And yet there is this part, and I think that's what kind of gets down to how theology is actually very important to what a church is teaching. One last thing I'll leave you with today, and as we continue with these models of change and what a new era of the church looks like, is I think too a part of our culture is that with our individualism is we have come to enjoy and come to be comfortable with a what I like to call therapeutic deism. So kind of you mentioned deism and the versus deism versus theists, where deists are just a general emphasis on just there's a divine, there's a God. And whereas theists have more of a structure of God is the creator and left the earth, da-da-da. This, I would say, is what 99% of preaching is in like the Timberwood churches and the Joel Osteens, and that, yeah, they use scripture, but they talk about God as a way of making you feel better, as a way that you can heal your worries and your anxieties, as a way to, that when you go to church, you want to get something out of it. And it has created, and now it's kind of this illness that has spread throughout our culture, that we think that we should, that church is consumption. And that when we go to church that we should feel something. And if we don't, then that's not the right church. And it's just this modern mindset that we have. And as modern people, it's just, we've created this mindset of church, throughout history now that we have seen, we have become more and more individualistic, but now this has created this kind of hyper consumerist mindset of the church. And then how do we move from that is then I think a challenge. But I've always thought of the problem within our churches. It's this, and just the general audience of people, that just people that don't go to church. It's because, well, they don't probably want to, and that if they did one time, they didn't get something out of it. Or if they did, largely the preaching was this therapeutic deism. It wasn't really preaching good stuff, like, loving your neighbor and actually doing Christian works. Again, not saying it's part of salvation, but but like what Luther struggled with, but it is an essential, if not a part of the Christian person. Yep.
I just want to throw something out because I won't be here to do it next week.
Yep.
I'm seeing with my daughter and my grandson and his family, they're going to these mega churches.
Mhm.
The one thing, they'll come here and go to church
Yeah.
with me when they're here.
Yeah. Which is so interesting. As someone who grew up in the E-Free Church with a very simple, low church liturgy, and then fell in love with it when I went to the Lutheran Church, and the practices of it.
That's my experience as well.
Yeah, and so there is, yes, but it's both ways. I would say people who don't like the liturgy often don't know what the liturgy is. And that is on our church and all churches who follow the historic Christian liturgy have not done well teaching and why we do, and answering the why questions. And allow people to say, hey, I don't like it this way. And then a church leader can be like, well, do you know why we do it this way? I think, so I think it's a both and, but yes, you're definitely right with people not wanting to participate in the church because they feel it's too structured, because they feel it's too religious, it's too closed off, or frankly, it's just people are uncomfortable with it because there's too many steps that they feel that they might mess up, and it's allowing for things to go wrong too. People want to be authentic, and whereas in a low church liturgy, low and high church just means higher liturgies, more practices, spells and bells, as we say. And low church just means lower practice, not super structured. Not that it's bad or anything, but it's, but yeah, they definitely emphasize that, and I think a lot of people are wanting something different, and
And there should, and there can be a balance.
Yeah.
There can be a balance so that, as you point out, we know why this is important. You know, if we're going to be a church, we want to know why this is important to this particular day.
yeah.
You know, and, not necessarily have to respond to the response.
Yeah.
And then respond again.
Yeah, and it's about allowing people to feel comfortable making those mistakes and being comfortable within the liturgy, which is funny. Then you go to like an Orthodox community where the liturgy, your church service goes 3 times over, and it's the same thing 3 times because everything has to be done three times. Everything is very symbolic in the Orthodox communities, but you can get up and leave and you can go and get food, and their structure is that you don't necessarily have to participate because the priests and the deacons are doing it, but you participate by coming and you bless the icons, you kiss the icons, light candles, you go up, and often they don't have pews anyhow, so you're standing, and if there is pews, it's more Americanized Orthodox communities, but you only are going to really sit down for the sermon, and usually the sermon is only preached on the saint of the day, not really about, they'll read some scripture. They read scripture, obviously, but yeah, so it's very interesting. We can kind of get more into church practices next week, but
The confession of sins.
Yep.
While there's a lot of people, I've heard people, and we do it here. Kate wrote it quite well, so it was easier to accept that we're all sinners.
Yeah.
And what I've heard people say, if I walked into that in any church, I would never go back because it's constantly flogging oneself.
Yeah. And
instead of building on what we do well and how might we do some of these things better.
Yeah, I mean, now we're getting into the challenges that don't necessarily have answers. So we'll continue to maybe get it a little bit closer to an answer next week. But so thank you all.
Thank you.